Well, I think it's fair to say that Britain is broken. The UK economy is in deep trouble, perhaps even on the brink of collapse. An energy crisis that could cause poverty levels that we've not seen in over a century, the slowest economic growth in all of the G7 countries, inflation rates which only ever tell half the story at 10.1%, a currency crisis and a new Prime Minister that's focused on things that I'm not sure that anybody gives a shit about.
And we are selling tea to China.
I mean, I don't like to prejudge, but come on, I mean, is this woman really going to do a better job than Boris Johnson, who was pretty useless in himself? Let alone figure out the worst economic crisis in decades. So look, instead of talking a little bit too much about my own personal opinion, instead we'll try and stick to the facts and the figures, and I'll give you guys what the outlook's looking like for the UK economy. And towards the end of the video, I'm going to give my approach and strategy to navigating these challenging times that we're facing into, in order to benefit thereafter. So where exactly do we start with the long list of problems that the UK are currently facing into? Well, let's start off by talking about probably the biggest one, which is the UK government. Because all of this starts and stops with the UK leadership. And with Liz Truss being Boris Johnson's successor, what chances does she have in order to make a success in her time in top-level government? Well, according to a study by YouGov, the public perception isn't exactly fantastic. 52% of people believe Liz will be a poor or terrible Prime Minister. That compares to 55% of people who believe that Boris Johnson did a poor or terrible job. And that's even before Liz has been in office for a week. Despite this, she's thought of in a comparably poor manner to her friend Boris.
My friend, Boris Johnson.
Oh, friend!
And she didn't even allow parties with wine and cheese during the height of lockdown. Although don't get Liz started on the topic of cheese because she'll go apeshit.
We import 2/3 of our cheese. That is a disgrace.
But jokes aside, the confidence that the UK people have of the UK government is at absolutely rock bottom, and it's somewhat understandable, because even in some of the comments that Liz made before she took over at number 10 doesn't exactly fill you with much confidence. When addressing the energy crisis, she said, and I'm going to quote this, "If I'm elected as Prime Minister, within 1 week I'll make sure that there's an announcement on how we're going to deal with the issue of energy bills, and of the long-term supply to put this country on the right footing for winter." But what she couldn't exactly do at the time was tell us exactly what the announcement would be. And well, that announcement came out today as at recording this video. And the answer is, as it always has been, borrow more money, which we'll talk about this proposed solution in a little bit more detail in just a moment's time. But fundamentally, it's the same old reactive government rather than taking a proactive approach to the issues which we're facing into and just papering over the cracks without actually addressing the underlying energy supply issue. So let's talk about the energy crisis. Now, with this being headline news absolutely everywhere, I'm pretty sure that you guys know what's going on. But just in case any of you have been living under a rock, here is the current day-ahead electricity prices, which are absolutely sky high. Yes, the price of electricity really is up 1000% since mid-2020, which is now why the energy price cap is absolutely soaring. Now, the issue that we have here is that with the new Prime Minister coming in, it's too little too late in order to tackle the underlying issue that's causing high energy prices, because the problem of soaring bills is already here. She said that she's going to focus on the long-term supply, and she'll first look to address sorting out the supply and the resources in the North Sea. But that's nearly naive, as Boris Johnson coming out and suggesting that we all go and buy a £20 kettle in order to save £10 worth of electricity per year thereafter as a potential quick fix to this issue.
If you have an old kettle that takes ages to boil, it may cost you £20 to replace it. But if you get a new one, you'll save £10 a year for every year.
Maybe it's just me, but it very much feels like these MPs and top-level officials in government very much are so far detached from reality that they have absolutely no concept whatsoever on the issues that I guess just your normal, average working class people are facing into. Because we're not even talking about an extra 10 quid to find in order to pay our electricity bills every single year. Because before today's announcement, we were talking about an energy price cap of over £7,000 by the start of 2023. If you break that down into monthly payments, it's about £600 per month, which is the equivalent to a mortgage repayment. Now, in order to combat this, Liz has proposed, in order to help out the British people this winter, that she's going to borrow 100 billion quid in order to put an absolute cap on the energy price cap at £2,500 for the next 2 years. Now that's great for households because we're somewhat protected from the rising costs in energy. Well, kind of anyway, because that £2,500 energy price cap is already too much for some households, because it's still over 100% higher than what we were used to paying just 2 years ago. And your typical household might not be able to find the additional 1,200 quid in order to pay that additional amount for their energy bills. It's the reason why we're now starting to see the rise of groups like Don't Pay UK, which is nearly 200,000 people actively looking to boycott paying their energy bills. So we're very much living in extreme times of unrest amongst the UK population. And whilst Liz is certainly giving out in one breath, she's also taking in another, because it's another £100 billion on top of the already £80 billion worth of borrowing that was done during the pandemic. And whilst I certainly believe there's absolutely no other choice for her to do what she's done, it doesn't exactly solve the problems that we have. Let me explain. When you borrow money, the money has to be repaid with a level of interest rate on top. Now, without me getting too technical here, you might be asking, well, where exactly does the government borrow its money from? It's not like Liz Truss is going to go down to HSBC and ask to borrow 100 billion quid. So the way in which the UK government do this is actually by selling bonds, which is almost like an IOU. So let's say that I were to give the UK government 100 quid and I were to buy one of these bonds, which are also known as gilts. The UK government over time would pay that money back to me with a layer of interest on top as well. For some people, they're very much seen as a low risk investment product. But interestingly enough, historically speaking, roughly about 1/3 of all of these gilts were actually bought up by the Bank of England, which is also known as something called quantitative easing, which in English is the good old-fashioned turning on of that money printer, which further increases the UK money supply, which has a boatload of issues in connection with it, which we'll discuss in a little bit more detail. But first, let's talk about why just borrowing more money isn't exactly ideal. And well, in short, it's because we're already sat on a budget deficit of £2.5 trillion. Now, a deficit is essentially how much the government's income falls short of what it spends every year. Now, if both me and you guys were to run our household this way, well, we'd probably be declared bankrupt. But because governments are governments and they hold all the power and status, they kind of just get to do what they want. Now, for context, that figure of £2.5 trillion equates to roughly 96% of total economic GDP, and is over £500 billion more than the total market capitalization of the FTSE 100, which I guess just kind of demonstrates the size and scale of the borrowing that's taking place, which of course is far from ideal. Why, you may ask? Well, there's two reasons that I want to discuss. First off, well, we'll all just go and whack the heating on this winter because it's now become somewhat more affordable. But in turn, that increased level of demand will only ever put more supply constraints on energy on the whole, which therefore has a knock-on effect and pushes energy prices higher. The other reason is, well, it's a loan, and loans have to be repaid. And guess who foots the bill? Yep, you guessed it, both me and you guys as the British taxpayer. Because whilst this winter our energy bills might be slightly more affordable than what they were potentially going to be proposed to be, you can bet your bottom dollar that as soon as energy prices stabilise, perhaps 2 years into the future, you can guarantee that income tax, VAT, national insurance contributions will certainly go up because the government will have to balance the books in some way. And whilst all of this is going on, the UK is fundamentally becoming weaker and a less attractive economy for both domestic and international investment. And you can see the direct impact of this, especially when we consider all of the quantitative easing that's been going on. When you take a look at the state of the Great British Pound, the pound is actually at its weakest levels against the US dollar since 1985, trading at less than 1.15, which is also down about 15% year to date so far. And as a result, it's been labelled as nothing short of a currency crisis. To go on to add to our energy crisis, cost of living crisis, and climate crisis, amongst many other crises too. But fundamentally, when you have a less competitive Great British Pound, it only exacerbates our problems. Why, you may ask? Well, a Deutsche Bank FX analyst actually summed it up quite nicely when he said, with the current account deficit already at record levels, sterling requires large capital inflows supported by improving investor confidence and falling inflation expectations. However, the opposite is happening. These are simply all of the issues that we've just addressed. And if you think with a weak pound, our imports are becoming more expensive, especially for those imports that are denominated in US dollars, which unfortunately for us happens to be some of the major markets around the world, like oil and gas. So with that, our costs as a nation are becoming far higher as we become essentially less competitive on a global scale. So look, both the UK government and the Bank of England are under huge pressures right now in order to sort out all of these broader macroeconomic issues. And if the right decisions aren't made quickly, it could be absolutely disastrous for the UK economy. Unfortunately, it very much feels like the prosperous days of the country are now gone, with the UK no longer really even ranking as one of the global powerhouses. Instead, now we're looked upon as more of an emerging market, as we're slowly getting eaten up by all of the other countries that are just fundamentally making better decisions about their futures. I mean, we've had 4 prime ministers in the past 6 years. The Conservative Party leadership changes as often as Man United's manager, which is simply quite embarrassing. But I guess it's why we've also lacked direction along with progress over the past 6 years. Which I guess you could say is the same reason why Man United have remained trophyless over the past 5 or 6 years too. So what on earth do we do about it? Well, I'm very much of the opinion that I try not to worry about the things that I can't control. And unfortunately, I have no control whatsoever on the absolute shit show that's happening right now in the UK. It is what it is, and it's something that we simply all have to try and deal with. The UK have once again come in with their support packages, which has certainly brought us some time, but it hasn't exactly addressed all of the underlying issues that we're facing into, and the 22% inflation rate that Goldman Sachs have forecasted certainly feels like a reality waiting to happen. All I can really say from an investment standpoint, from my point of view, I think there's times like this very much emphasizes the importance of having a well-diversified investment portfolio. In essence, don't be too wedded to the UK stock market or UK companies. Because right now I'm up about 15% just on the exchange rate difference alone from having invested my Great British Pounds into US-based companies where my money sits in US dollars. So actually, whilst the likes of Apple stock is down 14.3% year to date so far, I'm actually up 15% from transferring my Great British Pounds into United States dollars in order to buy Apple stock. So buying US stocks, I guess you could say, is somewhat of a hedge against the current issues in the UK right now, although that doesn't go to say that the issues in the UK aren't also taking place in the US as well. It just very much seems like on the surface that the US are dealing with it better. So I guess this could be very much an opportunity, perhaps even a wake-up call in order to broadly diversify your investment portfolio on a global scale. So with that said, guys, that's the situation for broken Britain. Will it be fixed? Well, be sure to let me know what your thoughts, opinions, concerns are down in the comment section below. But before you do go, guys, if you are interested in where you should actually invest your money over the course of the long term in order to ensure that you actually grow your wealth over time and that you aren't absolutely shackled by some of the issues that we're facing into as a country right now, then be sure to click on this video here. And with that being said, I'll see you over in the next one.